One of the most well-known podcasts in the entire world is the Joe Rogan Experience. The UFC analyst has been in trouble over the past 10 years due to his openness to chat with everyone though. Here are some of Rogan's most contentious statements, and despite its enormous popularity, host Joe Rogan has occasionally encountered criticism throughout the years, so let's examine 5 of the most contentious episodes that spectators and critics found questionable to say the least. First up, none other than Alex Jones himself. Alex Jones, a radio broadcaster and the creator of the website InfoWars, is arguably one of the most well-known conspiracy theorists in the entire world. For generating hate content by circulating rumors about a school shooting in the US, Jones had already been barred from Spotify's service. Rogan nevertheless spoke with him for his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, and posted the conversation online. Sleeping Giants, a left-leaning US media advocacy group, expressed outrage over the decision by tweeting, "Congratulations on paying $100 million for the right to a platform a man who tortured Sandy Hook parents. Spotify, not at all edgy. It's repulsive." Rogan's fact-checked Jones throughout the interview on a number of his wackiest conspiracy theories and determined that the majority of what Jones said was accurate, allowing Jones to propagate false information. Second, Kanye West, or Ye as he is known now, but what went down on the podcast? Almost all of Kanye West's interviews lean on the side of batshit crazy. No different was the 3-hour interview with Rogan. Some gems were exposed during the podcast, such as Ye saying in the shower that he thinks God called him to be the head of the free world. Here are a couple of Kanye's craziest moments made throughout the interview. "I was considering getting my master's, but then I decided that was a small thought. I'll purchase Universal. They are a $33 billion company at most, and I'm among the best product producers who have ever lived." And he finished it off stating, "I'm Christian, so I'm pro-life." Pro-life. Next up, the highly controversial Steven Crowder. American-Canadian pundit Steven Crowder is well known for his program Louder with Crowder. In his participation on the Joe Rogan Experience, he discussed the potential drawbacks that marijuana use might have on users. In a previous piece, Crowder asserted that only might desire to use marijuana. Joe Rogan, who is well known for being a fervent marijuana proponent, eventually lost his cool. Steven Crowder accused Rogan of bullying him by ordering his assistant to find materials that refuted Crowder's assertions, and Rogan responded by calling him a number of insulting insults. Fourth on the list is Jamie Kilstein. Popular American author, stand-up comedian, and radio personality Jamie Kilstein. He talked extensively about the difficulties that rape and sexual assault victims face when he was a guest on the Joe Rogan Show, and Kilstein ultimately made the argument that rape victims are the most unfortunate. Joe Rogan took issue with his statement that being the victim of rape is worse than passing away. Rogan referred to his guest as crazy and said it's astonishing that he would prefer people to perish rather than attempt to address issues relating to assault and rape. And finally, Iliza Schlesinger. Stand-up comedian and author Iliza Schlesinger is the author of Girl Logic, The Genius, and The Absurdity. In 2017, she also made an appearance on Joe Rogan. Evidently, Schlesinger's appearance on the program offended several listeners. Many YouTube users complained that they could only listen to a small portion of her program. Less than 1 million people have watched the podcast YouTube video to date, which isn't very big for Rogan's pod. Now, some Joe Rogan fans believe Schlesinger rambled during her appearance. She goes into great detail early on in the episode on why women take so long to choose a restaurant when their husbands or boyfriends ask them to. Additionally, several listeners didn't like her perspective on feminism. Schlesinger's unimpressive debut on Joe Rogan had to be an isolated incident. She has fans everywhere, and if her next tour dates are any clue, Schlesinger will tour the US, Canada, Hungary, and Ireland for the first half of 2020, and her book Girl Logic also has a strong 4.6 rating on Amazon. And there were far too many than 5, so we had to include some honorable mentions, of course. And let's take a look. First up, Amy Schumer. Amy Schumer is an American comedian. We all know her, right? Well, she is known as a divisive personality who should be well known to anyone who has spent any considerable amount of time on the internet. Others would have you believe she is comparable to history's most heinous rulers, while others see her as a pioneer for women's comedy. Numerous claims that Schumer has stolen ideas from other comedians on various times contributed significantly to her stardom. Therefore, one of the reasons for the terrible response to his podcast is because Joe has consistently been very outspoken when it comes to plagiarism in the comedy industry, and fans anticipated him to call Schumer out on it. After all, Rogan was temporarily barred from the renowned Comedy Store in 2007 after challenging fellow comic Carlos Mencia on stage for stealing jokes. Due to this, many viewers believed that the UFC commentator had held Schumer to a lower standard and prevented her from taking responsibility for her errors. Next up, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, the pinnacle of awful podcasts. Many believe Joe would have the opportunity to question Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey about a variety of topics relating to the platform when he first appeared on the JRE in 2019. Fans thought Joe would challenge Dorsey about the claims that the platform was actively restricting particular ideological ideas after many JRE veterans claimed it on the show in the past, but it never happened. In the end, the discussion was uninteresting because Rogan almost ever pressed Jack on any of his views. Disappointed disappointing fans to the tune of over 87,000 YouTube dislikes. Perhaps this wasn't something that needed to be shocking. Since he is the CEO of the multi-billion-dollar firm, Dorsey has undoubtedly received training on how to give journalists evasive responses that won't have an impact on stockholders' perception of the company's value, unlike a particular CEO of Tesla. Joe later apologized for the incident, and Dorsey later returned to the JRE with Twitter CEO Vijay Agadi for a far more civil conversation with Tim Pool on internet censorship. Now, it only makes sense to include some of Joe Rogan's most controversial moments, as he had plenty. Let's dive in. In the late 1980s, Joe Rogan started his comedy career in Boston, but before moving to Hollywood. Rogan's career subsequently underwent yet another unexpected turn when, despite having no aspirations to enter sports broadcasting, he started commentating UFC fights. His unreserved reluctance to adhere to political correctness and his candid thoughts have now contributed significantly to his popularity. The comedian has therefore frequently found himself at the center of controversy. Discover some of Joe Rogan's most contentious statements by reading on. First up, his interview with comedian Carlos Mencia. Thanks to his Comedy Central sketch series Mind of Mencia, comedian Carlos Mencia was a rising star in the comedy world in 2005. However, his career was severely damaged when Joe Rogan claimed in a blog post titled "Carlos Mencia is a feeble-minded joke thief" that Mencia routinely and continuously plagiarized the work of other comics and passed it off as his own. The rivalry between the two comedians reached a boiling point in 2007, according to the Times Herald record, when Rogan approached Mencia on stage at Los Angeles comedy club The Comedy Store and charged Mencia with routinely plagiarizing the material of other comedians. The two got into a pretty heated argument in front of the club's guests after Rogan referred to Mencia as Menstelia. Years later, Mencia stated that he has no interest in participating on Rogan's show to discuss the matter. Dane Cook was then accused of comic plagiarism by Rogan in 2007 as well, and the comedian said that Cook was not a very good writer. Additionally, Rogan acknowledged that he felt compelled to criticize comedians like Cook, accusing him of stealing stuff. Then years later, on a podcast episode from 2020, Rogan discussed his conflict with Mencia. "I don't have any hate for that dude." Secondly, the Milo Yiannopoulos interview left viewers talking, that's for sure. Political commentator and author Milo Yiannopoulos is well known for his writing on a variety of extremely contentious topics. He's a far-right commentator whose writing makes fun of social justice, feminism, Islam, and other issues. The discussion between the two became pretty heated during the Joe Rogan podcast as they discussed a variety of topics. In his remarks on religion, Milo said that Christianity is the source of most forms of socially acceptable behavior in the modern world. Joe Rogan eventually broke into a frenzied tirade and refused to consider the viewpoints of his guests. And finally, who can forget the Eddie Bravo podcast? Like Joe Rogan, Eddie Bravo is a podcast host. He is a well-known musician and stand-up comedian who made strange statements on the Joe Rogan podcast. The flat earther Bravo wouldn't change his mind, despite being shown satellite photographs of a round Earth. He asserted that Earth is flat and that all space organizations are complicit in this deception. Ultimately, a heated dispute resulted from Joe Rogan's refusal to take Eddie Bravo's remarks seriously. He insulted his guests and said he did not understand why space agencies would misrepresent the planet's shape. There you have it. Everything you need to know about Joe Rogan's most controversial podcast guests, along with a controversial Rogan moment. Now, make sure to let us know your thoughts down below, and as always, thanks for watching.